Well, welcome to Cafe Cabaret. Tonight's presentation is titled Bad Ideas. Now, these bad ideas don't necessarily refer to the ideas which we will be discussing in this evening's program. However, perhaps I can devote a certain percentage, at the very least, of this particular program to the bad ideas which have dominated 20th century political discourse. A pretty tall order, particularly for somebody with no real certifiable credentials in the field. Someone who is, in fact, perhaps certifiable himself. In a nuclear knowing world, eternal vigilance, not a disarming gesture, is the best hope for keeping the peace, says the reliably predictable Economist in its issue of January 4th, 1997. Freedom, it is said in the same journal, must be weighed against other goods such as equity, morality, and social order. Some examples of fetterish, which is, of course, a portmanteau word meaning federal and gibberish. The American people want means I want. Clarify means to obscure. And I can't recall means I'm not telling. Well, in in Hamlet, which of course we mentioned 2 weeks ago was perhaps the most political of all of Shakespeare's plays. In the New Yorker of January 13th, Terence Rafferty says, if Hamlet is, among other things, the greatest revenge tragedy ever written, it is surely because, in the hero's agonized deliberations, we feel the dull, awful weight of even the most justifiable act of murder, a responsibility too large and too terrible for human reason to bear. Well, some predictions for the coming millennium. Another oil shock, war with China, United States flat tax, nuclear terrorists, all by the year 2001. By the year 2005, HIV cured, commercial DNA computers, a new U.S. state. By the year 2010, cancer cured, self-driving cars, nuclear devices used. By the year 2016, a non-Christian president elected. By the year 2020, genetic defects deleted via DNA science. By the year 2025, collapse of U.S. government, a moon base, a device to view the human mind. By the year 2050, World War III, the dinosaur recreated, immortality achieved, world population 10 billion, and by the year 2100, world government, the much feared world government. By the way, something I predicted in a play that I wrote a couple of years back has come true. According to Newsweek of January 13th, 1997, it is said that in suburban Michigan, the highway builders Payne and Dolan give their employees interest-free car loans. So it's once again a case of truth being stranger than fiction. It is said that a language, runs an adage, is merely a dialect with an army, which is kind of interesting. One of those aphorisms which build themselves on Mark Twain's famous adage that cauliflower is just cabbage with a college education. Great satirists of our era: Twain, Ambrose Bierce, Will Rogers, Walter Winchell, George Carlin, Mort Saul, Saturday Night Live, Bill Maher. The U.S. News and World Report of January 20th devotes itself to a lengthy discussion of Bill Maher, and it took Newsweek until July of 1997 to catch up with him. Once again, a case of U.S. News and World Report being on the beat months before anybody else, strangely enough. TV has an eerie ability to blur the distinction between one familiar face and another, with the result that actors, sports stars, politicians, journalists, and notorious criminals can appear simply an undifferentiated mass of famous people. Campaign opposition research took the frequency and content of candidate jokes as vital signals about how their candidate was doing. We now proceed in our presentation of bad ideas. All men are more or less afraid of the truth, says Kierkegaard. And, of course, this is not a bad idea. It is an outrageous abuse of both time and literature for a man to commit his thoughts to writing without having the ability to arrange them or elucidate them or attract readers by some charm of style. Great presidents don't do great things. Great presidents get a lot of other people to do great things, according to Time magazine, who is quoting Bill Clinton. John F. Kennedy showed signs of ruthlessness and the glib assumption of privilege, but part of me loved America, loving Kennedy, says John F. Stocks. Henry Grunwald senses America's ability to domesticate menace and shrink giants, making invalids out of supermen. All this in a eulogy for the deceased Henry Grunwald, formerly of Time magazine. Jay Leno says, "What I got from Johnny Carson was you need jokes and you need attitude. If your joke dies, then your attitude can carry you. If your attitude dies, then your joke can carry you." This is not specifically a political notion. However, I thought I'd throw it in. What happens after a Saturday night speech by Hubert Humphrey? Sunday, said Adlai Stevenson. Jack Kemp is said to believe that Dole Kemp would have won, but for Gingrich. He might have added, but for Dole as well. He's leading the fight against corporate welfare. There's no Democrat leading the fight against corporate welfare, says Ralph Nader on John Kasich, Republican representative from Ohio. John Kevorkian refers to the Supreme Court as 9 religious kooks. Henry Hyde's definition of a politician: someone who can accuse his opponent of deviousness without seeming envious. William F. Buckley, citing James Burnham, says, "Idealism in politics is always a cheat, and freedom emerges only as the byproduct of the contentions of elites." Once again, James Burnham cited by William F. Buckley, or perhaps just William F. Buckley himself, said, "Washington is a feverish city. Its preoccupations are intense and unreal. A political magazine must have the check and balance of geographic distance. Anywhere else would prove a useful vantage." Or as James Burnham put it, everybody knows everything. George Orwell said, "One has to belong to the intelligentsia to believe in that. No ordinary man could be such a fool." Here's an idea. Here's a example of bad ideas. Beneath the pacifism, Orwell charged, lay not a genuinely principled opposition to violence as such, but only violence used in defense of the Western countries. George Orwell also referred to smelly little orthodoxies. One sometimes gets the impression that the mere words socialism and communism draw toward them with magnetic force every fruit juice drinker, nudist, sandal wearer, sex maniac, Quaker, nature-cured quack, pacifist, and feminist in England. Norman Podhoretz says that 1984 represented as a warning against the U.S., thereby proving that it is possible to be Orwellian even in interpreting Orwell. Give the New York Times some credit. Its continuing efforts to pump up the Gingrich scandals, according to the Weekly Standard of January 20th, verge on the heroic. In George magazine of February of 1997, John Max notes that the year 1996 marked the fourth consecutive presidential election in which Cuomo did not run, which makes him the anti-Stassen. What's the deal with Republicans' first names? And now we're sounding like Andy Rooney, but this is John Marks. What's the deal with Republicans' first names? Lamar, Orrin, Arlen, Strom, Newt. Don't they know that presidents have names like Ron, George, and Bill? Amway salesmen are called Lamar. Forbes. What is it about eccentric billionaires that make them get bad haircuts? Again, the very witty John Max. M-A-C-K-S. While living on coffee and Diet Pepsi is all very well and good, but I actually have to start getting some nutritious food into me. Only the wrong hero would dare even attempt this, but I'm going to eat while I do this. Well, first I have to let the food cool off. You know, this is just crazy. I mean, I'm running exactly 3 minutes ahead of schedule, and inevitably I will be running behind schedule by the time I finish this particular program. Christine Todd Whitman. Did you ever see her standing next to fellow New Jerseyite Steve Forbes? They look like Lovey and Thurston Howell III. Once again, a quote by John Max. James Traficant Jr., a man who often expresses himself so vehemently that he seems on the verge of going out of control, cited by the Wall Street Journal's Tucker Carlson. Environmentalist, says Don Young, Republican of Alaska, are despicable, self-centered, waffle-stomping, Harvard-graduating, intellectual bunch of idiots. Tell that to the Green Party, pal. You'll be cashiered before too long. Incest is not rape because it can be handled as a family matter within the family, says J. Dickey, Republican of Arkansas. Now there's the difference between Arkansas and Atlanta. Could you tell me where your master is? Because under South Carolina traditions, You shouldn't be out after sundown without a note from your master. None of the big Republicans make a move without consulting Michael Deaver first. He doesn't want any attention about his newfound prominence. Last time he was this big, he got his head chopped off. Words to the wise. A bureaucratic snafu is explained away as mistakes were made in the lexicon of the political junkie. Cross-dressing means Democrats acting like Republicans and Republicans acting like Democrats. A drawbridge is an idea that sounds good but doesn't work. A toll bridge is a program funded by new taxes. Drive-by has become a pseudonym for shoddily administered government services like, mastectomies, for example. Implementation Congress is a pseudonym for the 105th Congress. REGO, Reinventing Government. M2E2, Medicare, Medicaid, and Education and Environment. That presumably will be Gore's platform in the year 2000. Pre-buttal. Well, it's responding to a charge before it's been made. Of the vital center means the middle of the road. Of course. Since they're the swing voters, you got to flatter them to death. The extremists of both parties dictate the primary season like little mobs and ochlocracy. If you can get your lips around that word. Let party bosses pick the candidates. He calls Ronald Reagan the quintessential two-faced Paul whom people crave because Reagan talked the conservative rhetoric but ran the national debt into the trillions and didn't cut anybody's pet programs. Bill Maher says, politicians are usually very loath to come out for prostitution. Al Sharpton responds, you're right. They usually have them come to the house. The Great Compromise, now, if you say that, it sounds like somebody, the Great Compromiser. Now, if you say that, it sounds like calling somebody the great asshole. In this focus group democracy we live in, you can get a very accurate reflection in your leaders, and that's what we don't like. Allowing Ronald Reagan to become president was, by far, my biggest failure in office, says Jimmy Carter. 1980 Republican Jimmy Hoover. Just as the Democrats ran on Hoover's failures well into the 1950s, the Republicans would go into the campaign against the ghost of Carter for more than a decade. Newspapers declared Massachusetts Senator Edward Kennedy's 60s-style sideburn liberalism as dead as Woodstock and lava lamps. Clark Clifford referred to Ronald Reagan as an amiable dunce. Ronald Reagan called Jimmy Carter a little schmuck. Asked if he would do anything over again, Jimmy Carter said, I would have ordered one extra helicopter, speaking of the failed rescue of the hostages in Iran. Ronald Reagan promised to turn the People's Republic into a land of laundromats when speaking of his foreign policy towards China. The people who most bewail bureaucracy so often turn out in practice to be the worst bureaucratizers of all, says Schlesinger on the Jimmy Carter-Ronald Reagan transition. All of these citations come from the same source, which is George Magazine of February 1997. Ted Graber, the Republicans' interior decorator from Los Angeles, couldn't wait to get the smell of catfish out of the White House. Walter Mondale, defending the Carter administration, said, we told the truth. We obeyed the law. We kept the peace. and that ain't bad. Although most considered Carter a kind, amiable man, he could turn nasty in an instant and unleash a cruel barb. At times he became downright vicious. The steely Carter laser stare was usually followed by a hurtful put-down. The way of the lone wolf, an inbred survival instinct. Even in the most informal of circumstances, Carter had to let his colleagues know he was in charge. Sounds an awful lot like we replaced Nixon with Carter, or with another Nixon. If a person were loyal to Carter, the president would stick with him or her, forgiving gross impropriety and bedrock incompetence in the spirit of Christian generosity. Jimmy and Rosalind had always used vigorous exercise to ward off depression. In his farewell address, Jimmy Carter said, "The national interest is not always the sum of all our single and special interests." And of course, Rosalind Carter said, "Why, Jimmy, those are the reasons you lost." Well, moving right along, Newsweek of January 20th. Newt Gingrich on his narrow re-election. "To the degree I was too brash, too self-confident, or too pushy, I apologize." Isn't that nice? "Reporters love to destroy people. That's how they get their rocks off," said Bill Clinton to Dick Morris. "Dole is evil, an evil, evil man," says Bill Clinton to Dick Morris. Sounds an awful lot like Bill Clinton is getting one of the wrong hero's favorite expressions. Maybe I ought to send him a tape showing my use of that expression. Years before he used it to pertain to Dole. According to Dick Morris, Bill Clinton is drowning in information, immobilized by the mass of material he consumes, rather than empowered by it. Bill Clinton said, "I like subterfuge. That's why I like you. That's one of the reasons." He said it to Dick Morris, incidentally. But of course, Bill Clinton never says a negative thing about his wife. Isn't that sweet? And now we're skipping several days. If Lincoln had had a Stephenopoulos, he wouldn't have written the Gettysburg Address. He would have said, "Read my lips, no slaves," and that would have been the whole of it, says Lee S. Dreyfus. The Gettysburg Address, said David Halberstam, is filled with sound bites. It's a great creation for modern television. According to Jackie Mason, talking about his methods as a political commentator and comedian, "I read 5 or 6 newspapers a day, all the major magazines. I talk to people, I study people, and I listen to people. I just have an insatiable curiosity about what's going on in the world, and I always manage to find the inconsistencies, the incongruities, the hypocrisies, and all the peculiar things in life that can make people laugh. So every couple of years now I do a new show on Broadway, which is something I've been doing for the past 10 years. There's no significance to the titles. I make up different names to let people know that I'm not repeating any old material." Jackie Mason also lets us know that he thinks that there is institutionalized stupidity in this country. Well, I would certainly hate for any portion of this presentation to be taken up primarily with the sounds of my chewing, because it's so unprofessional. You might say it was strictly from hunger. And believe you me, I am a hungry boy. Besides John F. Kennedy's use of the phrase, "ask not what," the phrase was also used by William Gamaliel Harding and Oliver Wendell Holmes, you'll be interested to know. James R. Kincaid characterizes journalism thusly: journalism is less often a matter of thoroughgoing originality than it is a series of artful textual variations on stories with no clear point of origin. Stories employing language that is boilerplate anyway. Most of us will concede that absolutely pure originality is an over-the-rainbow idea. None of us invent the language we employ, our education, our culture, or our history. True enough. I'd like to read for you some choice rhetorical effusions from Ed Anger's book, "Let's Pave the Stupid Rainforest and Give School Teachers Stun Guns." Happier than Michael Jackson at a Cub Scout jamboree on Michael Jackson. On China, or is it Japan? Rice ball racketeers. Forget about the greenhouse and worry about your own house. Give the kids a bath. Trim the hedges. Order up some aluminum siding. Madder than a tomcat with his tail caught in a light socket. Madder than the bird made of Alcatraz with a dead parakeet. Madder than a bullfrog with a Charlie horse. Madder than a monkey with a rotten banana. Madder than Uncle Sam with bubble gum in his beard. Madder than Batman with a run in his tights. She's so fat she has to put a bookmark in her neck wrinkles to find her pearls. Madder than Dumbo the elephant with an earache. Madder. Prince Charles is a flap-eared, horse-faced imbecile. If she had one more wrinkle, she could screw her hat on. So ugly she could snag lightning. So ugly the cat wouldn't look him in the eye. So ugly they'd peel the enamel off a refrigerator. Jackie O, with eyes so wide apart she looked like a catfish if you caught her head on. She'd have scared a bulldog off a meat truck. If this escaped alien ends up in my backyard, I'll fill his fish face full of lead so fast his ray gun will not clear his holster. The only offer the Germans ever made for a piece of property came out of the barrel of a cannon. After they get bored with the oompa bands and sauerkraut parties, goose-stepping, beer-guzzling strudel eaters, cabbage heads. When we're all eating Wiener Schnitzel, don't tell me I didn't tell you so. Hillary Clinton, madder than Hillary Clinton at a travel agents convention. Communist protesters blubbering into bullhorns, madder than Hiawatha with a leaky canoe, madder than a doctor with a dent in his Ferrari, madder than Daniel Boone with a rusty musket. Generation X, they're so stupid, X is the letter they sign their name with. Madder than William Shakespeare with a leaky pen. If you're so smart, what the hell do you need a computer for? I'm so mad I could chew up a hand grenade and spit the pieces in somebody's face. Madder than a pit bull with a toothache. Madder than a skunk in a perfume factory. Madder than a pig at a barbecue. Madder than Davy Crockett watching a Mexican hat dance at the Alamo. Madder than the Wright brothers with a busted propeller. The only thing a Frenchman will fight for is a bottle of cheap wine or one of those floppy artist caps they're so crazy about. Madder than Newt Gingrich in a gay bar. Happier than Babe Ruth with a case of beer. Madder than Henry Ford in a Chevrolet. Madder than Alexander Graham Bell being put on hold. I haven't cried since I was 3 years old and ran out of BBs trying to kill a hummingbird. He refers to hanging as dancing lessons at the end of a rope by sundown. The Duke, referring to John Wayne, gave him a lecture with his right fist. Sand Weasel Hussein, butchering bum, tin horn dictator. Some choice words about Teddy Kennedy. A bunch of relatives with teeth like piano keys. How many Kennedys does it take to change a light bulb? 3. 1 to hold the bulb and 2 to drink until the room starts spinning. Say, that really is quite good. Makes you wonder where they got that. Ross Perot, the sneaky little money bags. Hussein, simpering little sand flea, towel-headed tyrant. Madder than a red coat at the Boston Tea Party. On a possible war with North Korea. It'll make Armageddon look like a Sunday school picnic. North Korea will be flatter than a Kmart parking lot when we're through. You buck-toothed, chow mein gobbling, yellow-bellied cowards. You win and you can build all the A-bombs you want. I win and North Korea does the whole world's laundry for the next 10 years by hand. Socks was spraying the White House like the Orchid Man at a roach convention. Not enough to pick on the Democrats, he has to pick on their cat, too. You wouldn't make good slop for my hogs. If I ever meet you, I'm going to rip that steel plate out of your head and pound some sense into you with it, said Ed Anger claims one of his dissatisfied customers said to him. America, love it or leave it, a heckler shouted to comedian Barry Crimmins in the middle of a routine, mocking witless patriots. I would, Crimmins shouted back, but then I'd have to live under America's foreign policy. This was cited in a book by Mary Kay Blakely entitled Red, White, and Oh So Blue. A choice quote indeed. Well, we're getting it. We're getting it done. I see hell in hello. It's disguised by the O, but once you see it, it will slap you in the face, says Leonzo Canales, who once the official courthouse greeting for Kleberg County changed to Heaven O, cited in Time magazine of January 27, 1997. In The Economist of January 18th, it is stated that grandiose ideas are dangerous. Little things are vote getters, vote winners. Bill Clinton, please copy, and indeed he has. Hotels happen to be an apt metaphor for Mr. Richard Morris's subject. Behind a luxury hotel's facade of uniformed valets, plush carpets, and gourmet menus is another world of service lifts, kitchens, and hard labor. A customer does not really want to see this strange hinterland, but it is what allows him to stay in such comfort. So it is with political consultancy. A consultant's trade, full of cynical maneuvers and Machiavellian manipulations, is not pretty. Well, I think what I'm going to do is talk a little bit more about Dick Morris, and then perhaps I will put on some pre-recorded materials for your delectation. So I can run off, eat my lunch, get my laundry, and not lose any time. Time, of course, is always of the essence. Joe Klein said of Dick Morris's memoirs, it was Uriah Heep on the couch. A mental spritzer. He can't control himself. He riffs endlessly. Bill Clinton and Dick Morris. The story of their meeting rehearses one of the more traditionally satisfying American legends. The city slicker who takes and then is taken by the inspired rube. When I was a boy growing up, said Bill Clinton, my daddy never had to whip me twice for the same thing. When you put Bill Clinton in front of a camera or a crowd, he comes alive. Suddenly he's eloquent, compelling, empathic. One thinks of Ronald Reagan and of other Potemkin Village public figures. The public Clinton is a performance hologram. The private Clinton is a stranger. Dick Morris, his job is to create a program, or perhaps the appearance of one, that will palliate a majority. Machiavelli believed that indolence was the greatest threat to a republic. Why should anyone listen if the only purpose of politics is to measure our whims? Well, we're going to put on some nice pre-recorded material, and then in the interim I will eat and pick up my laundry and do all those other things that I've been intending to do. This is from a performance recorded at the Meltdown House in Cambridge on April 19th, 1997. So I'm getting ahead of myself here. As a matter of fact, it was probably the last thing I did before I started this rather lengthy farrago of half-digested quotations put in no particular sequence for the dubious delectation of an audience I have no way of measuring or even speaking to, since I know not who it is I speak to. By the way, if you're interested in a transcript of these recordings, you're out of luck. I don't have the time to do it. And even if I did, I think the results would probably, or at least possibly, be less than satisfactory. I do hope someday to put some of the ideas mentioned in these presentations into a book of some kind, although whether it will be a coherent narrative or a work of utter artful fiction, or both, or neither, is something I cannot at this time adjudge. How do you like that, huh? Only the wrong hero would use a word like adjudge on television. But that's the wrong hero for you. That's the wrong hero all over. 'Twas ever thus, 'twill ever be so. Well, hi everybody.
Right.
Now I'm the sad one. Standing by.
Where's the performance epicenter? Oh, the epicenter. Theater in the round. Exactly.
No, I don't know about this theater in the round, Jay. You look like a bunch of squares to me, Jay. A bunch of squares. Say, here's $100. Why don't you go out and get yourself some nice suits? I like to see why boys looking sharp, see? Hey, you there, that black girl forehead. I want you to stand in front of the bank while we pull off the big job. And you, parking me your face. I want you to stand in front of the bank and pretend that you got a quarter in your stomach, so when the coppers come around, they don't tow our getaway vehicle. You understand me now? And you there, you, Bob Hope, yeah, you stand there in the lobby and you make them all laugh. Then you bust the gut while I'm shooting them right through the forehead and the blood to brain through gushing out with your laughing hysterically. Yeah, see? And you, there with the sweater. I don't know what you can do. You can stay home. Yeah, see? We're going to have one respectable looking guy to front the gang, see? The mob, see? And you, Jesus, yeah, you. You go walk on some water. Create a distraction somewhere. Yeah, okay? Okay, now that I've disposed of that nauseating format, maybe I'll go into Old Fuzzy, the 49er, you know? Like, yeah, well, it was back in 1949, days of 49, yeah, and we found uranium up in the Yukon, and, well, one day I found a Chinook, I found a man's fist the size of a gold nugget. Yes, sir. But then a Chinook blew it away, and so I blew him away. What does this damn Chinook have anything to do around here? No. Hey, no Southerners here. Oh, except you, right? Well, it's rural in the South. I mean, that's the question. I mean, what do they call it? You know, I guess when they're up north, they say, "Oh, I'm from Maryland." You know, like exact, precise diction, because you don't want people to think you're some crude, rude, ignorant hick with tobacco juice dribbling out both sides of your mouth. So, I'm from Maryland, but when you're down there, right? Oh, I'm from Maryland, see? Yeah, Maryland, that's me. I'm from Maryland. So Maryland, where's Sir Lancelot and King Arthur? You're from Maryland. You know, who sent you? All right, have a seat. Maybe not. Maybe not this time. I can't risk it, you see. I'm being investigated by the FBI. They want me to be a language teacher down in Guatemala, you know, write their new torture manual, and I can't risk being associated with such dangerous deviants and degenerates. It's like, Allen Ginsberg? He's the first on my list, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. People like Allen Ginsberg, they're a danger to the community, totally inoffensive, do never affect anything. Hey, I was just moving on your home state.
Francis, are you boring the crowd again?
What? Well, I don't know. There's a couple of pretty gals in the crowd I sure would like to bore some. But no, actually, I'm not. Strictly speaking. That's right.
Last illumination.
No, do not touch the lamp, please. Do not touch the light source. No, you are not Michelangelo. This is not the creation. You do not have to reach up and say, Pax Lumen, you know, fuck that shit. Just leave it alone. It's like this camera.
You got the video camera going.
Yeah, this camera, you know, it's a piece of shit.
I know it's a piece of shit. How many miles does this have on it? How many videotapes?
I've recorded over 1,000 miles on it. You're interrupting my flow. Anyway, I should introduce myself. I'm the wrong hero. Whoa. Thanks. You're the first to go. Allen Ginsberg. Yeah. So, I don't know. Folks call me the Aviator of Indolence.
Yes.
Yes. Now don't interrupt me. If you sit down in the blue chair, okay, I got the electrodes all hooked up. You say one more peep, and it's Voltage City. If it's not to smolder and turn frisky around the edges, well, hey, I'll teach you how to cook burgers in Florida, huh? Well, anyway, yes, folks call me the Aviator of Indolence, and I'm too darn lazy to think of any other honorific titles except perhaps the most exalted potentate of slack. 'Tis I. Also, the Sultan of Sloth, and,
Oh my God, Francis, do you have 3 pages of material? Well, I guess that's not too
This
bad.
is just like fucking par for the course. Nancy comes down here, you know, he says, oh yeah, we want you to be the feature performer here in our dingy, stingy, and dungeon basement, you know, where they used to, like, torture lab rats back in 1945 so they could do some work for the Foreman Project. And it's like, right, I am overjoyed to play in what is essentially landfill. You know, it's like, but then he comes down and says, oh, you got 3 pages. Well, anyway. Yeah, bro, just get it in trouble.
Francis, the fast land started at Brookline. This is not landfill. This is fast land.
I told you that. I'm just like stretching your point. You know, you can't believe a single damn thing you say. But on the other hand, you know, when you read fiction and stuff, it's like, yeah, that sounds plausible. Okay. As long as I'm being interrupted, I'm not going to go and do my regular stuff. Take a look at this ad, okay? In the improper Bostonian. It's a camel ad. They got rid of the penis-faced Joe Camel. Here's what they replaced it with. The inoffensive substitute version of the Joe Camel ad, right? Isn't that silly? Now, I know, a little light goes off in your head, but, okay, what you're looking for. A chunky chick to suck your wine. That's what you're looking for. That's what this is. God damn it. Actually, no,
Francis, you have a couple of records here you can destroy, too.
Oh, no, I don't want to do that. Except maybe, whoops, no. Well, I'll start on the advice here. So anyway, folks call me, Shay Man. Yeah, they say, Shay Man, you must have been fucked up out of your mind when you came up with that shit, boy. And it's like, that's what they said to Einstein, too. E equals MC squared. What don't you been smoking, buzzhead? You know, it's like you can't even buy a break in this country. I mean, the second you have one idea, someone ends up taking it, you know, and using it for some evil purpose, like making money, instead of using it for some beneficent purpose, right? Using it to make money to give to me? No. Anyway, no, it's the Joan Rivers approach. No. Yes, no. I got a dress. Yes, no. You know, or the Jay Leno approach. Well, terrific to see you all today. I'm just as happy as a clam to be here. You know, this place like modulates. It's like, put it on an oscilloscope and give people epilepsy. You know, like, well, I'm sure I'm glad to see you all. Anyway, folks call me the Shay Man of class animus, the avatar of the moron zeitgeist. I know your sight lines on there, but I'm going way too fast, but I'll slow down now. How's that? Do not adjust the focus. I'm just there. I needed that. Okay, it's props time. Now, we people who perform on stage either for a living or to annoy others use what we call props. It's short for properties, right? And now that I've thoroughly condescended to you by bothering to explain this, even though you don't really care, let's see, look at this. I'm the accordion player in Intergalactic Starlight 17. That's the only time you'll ever hear the words Intergalactic Starlight 17 in the same sentence. Hi, I'm Cosmic Uncle Sam. Mind explained. And now, for you tokens, it's Expendobon. Darth Vader's left lung. Don't cry for me, Argentina. Don't cry for me, Argentina. It's getting away from me now. Or, yeah, I hear you do the vacuum cleaner job. Can you give me a vacuum cleaner job? Oh, Mr. American, you number 10. It cost you 500,000 piastres. I don't care. I want the vacuum cleaner job. Okay, here go. Anyway, yes. Please, all children, exit the premises. Anyway, you know, if you're like most people, and frankly, who isn't? Then you're probably just like everybody else, right? You want a nice, clean show. But, you know, everybody else always ruins it for a few assholes. That's been my motto. It's still my motto. Okay? Let's sink in. Everybody else. This is my, yes, I'm the one here. This is my comeback tour. Now, I never really went anywhere except for that 20 years I spent in the hyperbaric chamber. Nor was I ever really very famous except for my #1 hit, Homosexual Truck Driving Man. But be that as it may, this is my comeback tour. And, you know, people walk up to me and say, wow, hero, I'm an enormous fan. And I'm like, yeah, me too. I'm an enormous fan too. Oh, holy shit. You're in the line of fire there, son. Yeah. Anyway, so how are you, Skipper? Hi, Skipper. Look at me, Boogie. Smokey. Hey, how you doing, old Doc? Say there, little lady. How you doing there, fella? Hey, pal. Say, Chief, good to see you. Mr. Chef. Oh, Mr. Chef. Mr. Chef, I miss you so much. So, why don't you come to my restaurant no more? Well, I've had a bad time. I've had, cancer. And, you don't come to my restaurant no more then. Anyway, yes, I'm all over the map here, huh? Literally. So, I don't really have a message. I'm not one of those people who pretends to have some, vast, deep, mystical, all-abiding message. But if I did have one message, it would be, kids, stay at school, because we don't want you around here. Okay? Underfoot. Me and the missus, we haven't had a fuck since 1948. Kids, just keep coming and coming. Anyway, conspiracies. Today is now the federal holiday known as Conspiracy Day. Oh, really? That's in Concord, 1777. And then a little bit of quiet for a while, and then all of a sudden we get Waco, Oklahoma City, and now, so today's Conspiracy Day. But it's just like New Year's Eve, all of the real drinkers stay home because there's too many amateurs out there. So, they're not going to nuke New York City. They're not, that jet that turned up missing over Colorado is not going to bomb Denver. That would be a slick professional job. You might have some cherry bombs down a toilet bowl, a couple of firecrackers when the presidential motorcade goes by. Minor stuff, kitty stuff, but no real big, boom kind of conspiracy stuff. It's like all of the amateurs are out and all the professionals stay home on the big conspiracy holiday. Now, we're always talking about conspiracies. Usually these are people in the heartland. 90% of them don't have jobs because, first of all, being a conspiracy theorist is a full-time job, and second of all, when they fill out their job application, hobbies, proving Oswald was a patsy, so they don't tend to get the good jobs, But I'll tell you what the real conspiracy is. God damn it, I'm not afraid. I'll take my stand and all that crap. Farmers are the real conspiracy. They control the nation's food supply, you fools! Stop them! And kill Quakers, too, because they won't fight back. Okay? I just thought I'd throw that in. The Amish, might as well. You knock them off. They don't believe in guns or zippers, so kill them. They're deviants, They don't use zip codes or drive automobiles. What kind of weirdos are these? And I'll tell you another conspiracy. Mickey Mouse. Think, what other popular beloved figure is exposed to the very youngest of children at the most impressionable possible age? Mickey Mouse. But what does Mickey Mouse really stand for? MIC, Military Industrial Complex. KEY, Keynesian Economic Yoke. MOUSE, more of United States engulfment. So, Mickey Mouse, that's a conspiracy theory. Just on this one day of the year, I wish they would have, instead of the family circus and the comic strips, the militia family circus, okay? There would be like something like, Mommy, how come there's Black History Month, but there's no White History Month? Every month is White History Month. So, that'd be cool. Anyway, let's just think of just some sort of overweight, wheezing gadabout who has nothing better to do than to entertain his playboy friends in a Stygian basement. Let me tell you about some of the books I've been working on. For the last 18 years, I've been working on a book about obsessive-compulsive disorders, but I can't send it to the printer because I have to proofread every word 50 times before it's perfect, So, no, that's not going on. Also, let's see, and I heard that there's a gene for anxiety, and scientists have found a gene that controls anxiety. And I'm like, how do they know? How do they know? And, I got another book. This one I think I'm actually going to finish. It's called Codependent and Loving It by me and my gal. This is a very solemn occasion. I mean, it's tax month, it's militia day, but you may not know it, but it's also National Poetry Month. What better than to put school children to sleep by, we'll make poetry reading compulsory. to play Nintendo and masturbate. No. Make it illegal. Then they'll all be flocking to read this shit. You know? I met a stranger in antique land. All right, you've read poetry for the last time. Yeah? But no, it's also National Trauma Awareness Month. But I was too frightened to mention it until now. Really. You know, on the way over here, I mean, I'm a confused kind of guy, right? But my girlfriend is too. It's like, no, she is. Because, you know, she's an existentialist. So I gave her a disengagement ring. And, that kind of worked out that way. But I'm kind of a confused guy. And I get into these deep, dark depressions when I think, you're broke, you're feeble-minded, you have no friends, no family in the immediate vicinity. What's going to become of you? And then, of course, the corresponding elation. Hey, I'm broke. No tax worries. Hey, no family to pester me. Hey, no friends to ask me for favors that I don't really want to do, but I have to if they want to be willing to be my friend. So, you know, there's an upside to every situation. I was thinking on the way over here, everything is coming my way. And that's because I was driving on the wrong side of the Mass Turnpike. So I was like, yeah, so I get pulled over by a policeman. And you know, it's the same old story. You just like kiss their fucking asses, you treat them like it's your dad about to send you to military school, and you get off the hook. Well, I'm sick of that shit. I'm not going to kowtow to any fake authority figures. No, sir. So I got some like stock answers ready for when they pull me over on the highway. It's like, why were you going so fast? I just do what the gun tells me to. You know? Whoa, hey, this gun is telling me. It's like, say you, well, I had to pull you in, I had to take you in. It was like, here, officer, I try to brag him, like, here, officer, here's $1. Go buy your wife some fishnet stockings and a whip, okay? Like, so, you know, it's like, all right, buddy, why were you speeding? When I've been drinking hard liquor, I got a strong need to get behind the wheel of a large automobile. Got any problems with that? Another thing I like to say to them when they pull me over on the highway, it's like, step away from the vehicle! Step away from the vehicle! Or, of course, you know, it's always nice. They pull you over, you're not supposed to get out of the car or truck or whatever, because that's threatening to them. You're supposed to leave your hand on the steering wheel, but if you know enough to do that, then you're probably already a 3-time loser, and you're like salivating at them. And they always pull you over right in front of a Whirlpool, you know? It's like, hey, we got someone, this guy, shoot him straight to the pen, that's right. Don't go with the middleman. Hey, we'll do it on a summary execution. We'll say he's an escaped convict, Your Honor. No, but, so I roll the window down, I stick the guy on, and I go, suck my trunk lace nipples, Art Belt! And so, you know, they pull you over and they go, why were you going so fast? Well, you know, you can consider that question in several different ways, officer. Of course, why does anybody do anything is the question that philosophers have been asking for many eons now. And eon is a very long period of time, officer. Well, I'll tell you something. I was speeding for the same reason that you're bothering honest taxpayers instead of sitting in a fucking donut shop getting your dick sucked by a slut. You know, or something like that. I don't know, I improvise according to the circumstance. The thing is, if you want to beat a traffic ticket or a speeding ticket, you gotta play a little game with them. It's called nice victim, mean victim. You know? Can't let them roll right over you. On the other hand, you know, you gotta sort of show them one knee. Give them one knee, not two, because you know then they'll just like roll right over you. No, one knee. So it's like, why are you speeding? Oh, top of the morning to you, officer. Sure, what's a police captain like you would do with me? Well, I'll tell you why I was speeding. It's like this. I was pretending the accelerator was a policeman's head. Because I was sucking on a cube of LSD, and I wanted to get home before I melted. Officer Knocky is going, sitting and picking her up, and Dunkin' Donuts at 4 in the morning.
And what a nightmare. The evidence was antimatter, and I was accused of not tampering with it. That right there was a nightmare. And then, turns out, my court-appointed lawyer was Aquaman. So, every hour he has to leave the trial and dunk his head in a glass of water so he doesn't die. And he comes back, hey, where were you anyway, fish boy? He's like, all right. I had to see some business on, Your Honor. And then the judge was Bruce Banner. And, nice guy, physicist, reputable scientist, but, he's like, well, I don't see where there's any evidence against this plaintiff. But then, right in the middle of his judgment, he turns into the Hulk and goes, oh, smash! So, that didn't work out very well. So, anyway, some of you might recognize me. I invented a car that runs on blood sugar. Of course, you might not recognize me because I lost 300 pounds on the drive from Albany. And it's a good thing I picked up that hitchhiker. I think it was Karen Carpenter, I don't know. I'll tell you something, I really had to fucking break all the speed limits to get here. It's like, I went from 0 to 60 in 10 seconds. And now I'm 99 years old. And my stomach don't feel so good. Mama sets the pies out to cool. I'll be on my deathbed babbling commercials from 1968 for Alka-Seltzer. Mama sets the pies out to cool. Ooh, my stomach don't feel so good. Take Alka-Seltzer. It's like, oh man. Greek and Roman heroes, they're like the words of the Iliad, the Odyssey. Elizabethan Englishmen, if it is to be done when 'tis done, 'twere well we're done quickly. Everybody needs a little KFC 1997, This is what we've come to. The 20th century is the story of the degradation of every myth and legend that has ever made us strong. Okay? For example, the Saturn car, right? Who are the marketing geniuses who came up with this name? What should we call the car? Mars? Nah, old Mars are over. Fuck that. Venus? No, we want to appeal to a broad segment of the market, not just females from 18 to 34. I know! We'll call it Saturn! Devours his own children! Great name for a fucking car! Yeah, I can see the first campaign. Here you go, son. Here's your very first set of keys to your very new first car. Gee, thanks, Dad. Saturn, because you don't want your kids mooching off you. And then here's another thing I can't figure out. Prometheus was chained to a rock and had his guts pecked out by buzzards because he stole fire from the heavens and was punished by the angry gods. Hey, Prometheus, steal the fire from hell. Steal it from hell. They won't miss it. They'll give you a medal for stealing because it's hell. Prometheus, it's hell. Steal it from them. Just a little message. Well, I think I'm just about the only person who does not consider himself a depraved product of a capitalist society. The only one! That's why I'm the wrong hero. But I would like to say a few words for my sponsor. I'm in business for myself. It's called Angry Wounded Pride Beer. The taste? Bitter! You can drink it first thing in the morning, unless you already have a bitter taste in your mouth. The 33 on the bottle, it doesn't mean that your prohibition ended. It's not the number of words on the bottle. It's your fucking life expectancy if you drink this slop. Okay? Our motto? Aged in porcelain buckets. Brewed yesterday. And it's like, here's how it got its name. I was talking to my girlfriend, and I said, I'm thinking about starting my own microbrewery. I think I'll call it that. I don't know what I'm going to call it. And she said to me, why don't you go out and get a real job instead of sitting around thinking of stupid beer names? Hence, Angry Wounded Pride Beer. Brewed yesterday, aged in porcelain buckets. Now, Angry Wounded Pride goes good with any food. But let's face it, a foamhead like you is beyond food. Capiche? I'm the wrong hero, entrepreneur, brewmaster. No, fine line of other homemade brews, Selfish Pride, Ale, and, let's see, Stupid Pride, Lager. Now, you Husker Du fans might realize that Stupid Pride, Selfish Pride, Pride! See, that's going to be the ad campaign for it, Husker Du. Anyway, I'd like to tell you about some of the other fine homemade products that don't meet any safety or sanitary standards whatsoever that I like to make. Stuck in the 60s incense, octogenarian goat yogurt, and she had some others, but I forget. Oh, but I would like to say a word for Move Over Butter, Fuck You Margarine, and Die, Lord, Die! I'd also like to recommend you buy my fine line of blubber products. I eat them. He eats them. Blubber Light, Blubber Free, Blubber Clear, Seafood Blubber, My Little Blubber. I can't believe it's blubber. Fat-free blubber, Teenage Mutant Ninja blubber, Mighty Morphin Power blubber, and new, for April 19th, Nazi-free blubber. I'd also like to mention, since it is April 19th, we're also the maker of the fine products Silly Sand, Silly String, Silly Dynamite, Silly Plastique, and of course new, Silly Plutonium. And continuing to beat this April 19th motif clear into the ground, I'd like to mention Anarchy Light. Only happens to be stabilizing as the leading form of chaos. And of course, what Easter time season would be complete without a word for Jesus Christ. Soup! Yep, it's alphabet soup. It spells out, my God, why have you forsaken me? You stitch it up there now. Also, I have to mention that Colombia is also brought to you by the penis. Strong enough for a man. But women like it too. I also like to mention my fine line of home roasted coffees. Conditioned response coffee. Smell that coffee. Really wakes you up in the morning, doesn't it? That's because it's conditioned response coffee. Look for the picture of a dog and the bell on every package. And of course I should mention, everybody needs a little KFC. That good home cooking just melts in your mouth. Then again, so does the mercury from a thermometer. Also marketing Spam Light. Only half the hog eyelids and other waste products and fecal matter of regular Spam. Well, hey! Welcome to the first annual Surrealist Convention. I am your host, Man Ray Hutch. Today we're going to recite some symbolist poetry. You see, the depths of meaning vary between day and a long pause into dark. See, that just says it all to me, anyway. And you guys have kids? No? Why, you filthy! You see, when you don't have kids, it's easy to be a communist, right? Oh, yeah, share everything. Second you drop one, it's like, precious time, you know? It's like, do you guys have a dog? A dog is a good practice for a kid, you know? It's like you're working your way up. First you adopt a midget, then a dog, then a kid, you know? It's like, get away from that! You know, you're talking to a dog, a kid, or even if you're a cruel man, a midget. But I'm having problems with my teenage son. And the hell of it is, he hasn't even been born yet. So I'm going to get even with him by giving him a weird name. Something like, hey, Mr. Homosexual Man! DiMenno. Or, I don't know, Cracklin' Oak Brand. That's a good one. Or Acidophilus. Rico Suave. Something like that. I can't stand it. All my friends brag about how great their kids are, how smart their kids are, how wonderful their children are. I don't have any kids. What do I have to brag about? Oh, left a nice ejaculate on the handkerchief last night. And it smelled like a petunia. Actually, it smelled like oysters Rockefeller, but that's not getting bad. Not in front of the kids. Come on in, sit down. There's a filthy, dirt-encrusted air conditioner from 1937 you can sit on. It's probably reeking of ozone and freon, you know. You play Munich in the north. Come on, all three of you can sit on that chair. Nobody will mind. Oh, I'm scared. Well, that will be on my gravestone. I'm scared, you know? I don't want that. That's what I expect my kid to say. Dad, look at me, look at me! No! Look at me! For I am Santar!
Well, that's about as good a place as any. And you know, to end this particular segment, but it's interesting. Critics rave about The Wrong Hero. I'm scared. That would be a good thing to put on my resume. He frightened the womenfolk. May God have mercy on us all. So, anyway, I hope you're enjoying this presentation of bad ideas. You know, it occurs to me, gee, maybe you shouldn't do this if you don't really have the time to devote to its successful and satisfactory completion. Yet on the other hand, there never seems to be enough time, as the American philosopher Jim Croce put it. And yet, on the other hand, time is on my side, as the British philosopher Mick Jagger has been quoted as saying. So, it's a real crapshoot. 6 of one, half a dozen of another. Whatever the hell that means. Well, back to business. After all, the business of America is sticking your nose in someone else's business. Now, in the Harpers of February 1997, getting back on track as brutally and ruthlessly as can be, he speaks of a dictionary of new commonplaces, which was put together by someone like Voltaire or someone like that, and offers some of his own updates. Accountants, the unacknowledged legislators of the world. Celebrity, wealth incarnate, the lives of the saints. Charity, the road to hell. Culture, the glittering scum that floats on the river of production. Democracy, there never was a democracy that didn't commit suicide. Quoted, John Quincy Adams. Ethics, local or regional customs. Freedom, synonymous with an income of $500,000 a year. Fur coat, symbol of democracy. History, anything that appears on TV. Literature, decorative art. Curds, always betrayed. Individualism, priceless commodity. Multiculturalism, The department stores understand it better than the universities. Russians. They brought ruin on themselves because for 74 years they forgot that money is God. Adam Smith, the 18th century avatar of Bill Gates. Superfluous. Word applied to people, never to hotels or automobiles. Virtue. Best practiced by the poor who have more need of it. Wars. The only important wars involve huge corporations, not nation states. Washington columnists. None of them believe what they write. They drive expensive cars and subsist on shiitake mushrooms. Zaire, corrupt country in Africa, proves the futility of giving money to people who don't understand it. Lewis Lapham's Dictionary of New Commonplaces from the Harper's of February 1997. Overall, Harper's is a much more interesting magazine than The Atlantic. Although in The Atlantic of the same month, Burkhard Bilger says that fish embody our social stereotypes. Trout, aristocrats. Largemouth bass, working class. Catfish, bottom dwellers. Gar, moon-eye, and paddlefish, untouchables. Well, Newt Gingrich, quoted in Newsweek of January 27. Almost as popular as Dennis Rodman and not as good on the rebound. I think they mean that sarcastically. Gee, now who could that possibly be to disturb my repose? Hello? That's the second such phone call I've gotten this day, in which I say hello, and nobody answers, but there's some suspicious background noise going on. Now, why would people do that? Call you up, and not say anything. Well, according to the Spectator of January 11th, and I don't necessarily agree or disagree with this, just to hedge my bets, Petronella Wyatt says, people who are anti-fur are really anti-human. Their apparent concern for animals disguises a hatred for the people who are thought to favor fur, the rich. These anti-people protesters would rather someone died than took warmth from the skin of a rodent like the mink. This fanatical concern for animals was of course shared by Hitler. The next time I come across an animal rights person, I shall be tempted to throw a dead human being into their soup. Well, well, well. Sir Peter Hall, cited by Simon Blow in the same inestimable journal. Political correctness. Puritanical Stalinism. I think PC is censorship under another name. It's making sure that subjects which are contentious and need discussing are not dealt with. Are we the best judges of censorship at the time we censor? Are we so alarmed and craven that we can't allow freedom? Good question. The English, says Petronella Wyatt, regard democracy as a cricket match. The other side must be given a chance. A Viennese friend said, that is not democracy, that's idiocy. Central Europeans think we are mad to contemplate throwing out the Tories. Some Hungarian girls find John Major very sexy. Because of the cold climate, they attach importance to ample head hair. Well, that's interesting. But then it doesn't make much sense because, I mean, down south, you know, all the women there, I mean, they tend to favor big hair, and, well, I don't know. Well, as Carlyle said about Swinburne, he is sitting in a sewer and adding to it. And as Emerson said of Swinburne, he is standing up to his neck in a cesspool and adding to its contents. Of course, Swinburne referred to Emerson as a gap-toothed and hoary ape who now, in his dotage, spits and chatters from a dirtier perch of his finding and fouling. Corpheus or Choragus of his Bulgarian tribe of autocoprophagious baboons, who make the filth they feed on. When Alan Coren asked a publisher what sold books, he was told golf, cats, and Nazis. So he wrote a book called Golfing for Cats with a large swastika on the jacket. Interesting, not much to do with politics, but in the history of bad ideas, of which of course this is perhaps the worst, this is yet another one. And so, on we go. Well, the Weekly Standard has quite a bit of interesting things to say in its issue of January 27th. Politicians always get politicians always get booed at sporting events, which just goes to show the truth of my old adage. Politics is sports for people who are too fat to run. There are three sports and politics fan archetypes: the lover, the aesthete, and the intellectual. Aesthetes know enough and are cynical enough about politics to put aside moral considerations and concentrate on the beauty. Football is a parody of war. Basketball, an inner-city street game. Politics is mythic. A game amounts to a kind of civic right, a shared ordeal. And now even more about Dick Morris and Bill Clinton. It's almost as if the Duke and Dauphin had been lifted from the pages of Huckleberry Finn and handed the reins of power, says Andrew Ferguson. Bill Clinton, says Dick Morris, doesn't articulate his responsibility because his mind is so full of self-criticism. Dick Morris refers to the funhouse world of spin, a favorite Washington euphemism for lie, or more charitably, shading the truth. Again, Dick Morris. The tantrums sometimes approach the kind normally associated with autistic children, except in the president's case, they are overlaid with self-righteousness and megalomania. That word again. Well, Walter Cronkite. He has a curious way of emphasizing syllables that, wedded to a mock pompous vocabulary, achieves a well-modulated comic effect. Well, as John Corey puts it, Petulance is not diplomacy. A moral foreign policy means that the United States can risk its blood and treasure only for causes other than its own. And he goes on to call Madeleine Albright a kind of Georgetown tomboy. As James Carville said about Kenneth Starr, he's one more mistake away from not having any kneecaps, whatever the hell that means. No one, it seems, is too far right to appear in The New Republic. Not even paranoid anti-communist Eric Brindell. Again with the Eric Brindell bashing. You know, of course, that for many years he was the editor of the editorials editor of the notoriously right-wing New York Post. Every political cartoon in the New York Post that has to do with Bill Clinton always has a picture of a chicken buried somewhere on the page. Something that was pointed out to me by John Patry, my girlfriend's father. Aside from promising not to praise Arabs, criticize Gore, or endorse affirmative action, all Marty Peretz seemed to demand of his new editor is that he somehow make the New Republic matter again. The Weekly Standard staff must struggle to come up with political positions that are as far right as those regularly expressed in the New Republic. This is from The Nation of January 27, 1997. Just so you know where my citations come from. The Nation has really picked up quite a bit of steam. I mean, it has its on periods and its off periods. I've been following it, however, pretty regularly since about 1988. And actually, even earlier than that. I mean, I guess it was one of the few magazines I was regularly reading even as far back as 1986. But you know, for the longest time I didn't have much truck with weekly or monthly magazines. Newspapers were the thing. But magazines are just so much easier to get pertinent information from. Newspapers involve so much sifting. Magazines do that sifting for you. If anything appears in a newspaper that's really good, somebody on a magazine will sooner or later pick up on it, even if it's weeks later, since, of course, the lead time of the magazine is not anywhere near as timely as that of a newspaper. For that matter, the lead time of the newspaper is nowhere near as timely as that of television, and for that matter, as long as we're making this rather tedious point, the lead time of television is nowhere near as brisk as that of the internet. So it leads us to wonder. Actually, I think radio might have a quicker lead time than television, and the internet a quicker lead time than even radio. So what's next? What is going to supplant the internet or the World Wide Web as the cutting-edge source of instantaneous information? Television was thought to be that, but except for breaking news, television and radio aren't particularly timely. There is such a thing as production ethics in commercial television, if not in cable television, which precludes, to use one of my fancy $3 words, any sort of lengthy preparation time. I'm sorry, which precludes any kind of spontaneous presentation. If you were to consider the immense amount of work that goes into even the most routine and casual television program, the mind would boggle. Just think of all the great literature we'd have if we could put that kind of effort into writing that we put into television. If living were a thing that money could buy, the rich would live and the poor would die, says The Nation of February 3rd. Washington never appears more Roman than it does during a presidential inauguration, says Chris Hitchens. Like every other aspect of hip, our old notions of authenticity and fakeness have been magically translated over the past few years into corporate parallels that are replacing the original categories. Only now that its sales have slowed are real journalists permitted to point out that alternative is insincere, that the music that alternative imitates, not being part of the corporate world, simply doesn't exist. Well, anyway, in the 5 permanent Security Council members also just happen to be the world's 5 major arms suppliers. What would that be then? China, the United States, Russia. Gee, I don't know who the other 2 are. England and France, I guess. So, and this was cited from World Press Review of February 1997, a magazine that I cannot recommend highly enough because it gives, what it attempts to give at least, is a balanced viewpoint of what the rest of the world is thinking, not simply that viewpoint espoused by the punditocracy of the American empire. Boorish, big-mouthed men die younger, says USA Today. Would that it were so. Would that it were so. Did you know that the FBI launched a 2-year investigation of the lyrics to Louie Louie? Well, you know it now. It was in Time magazine of February 3rd, 1997, so you know it must be the truth. Well, winding down, reaching our last half hour. My voice is getting rather hoarse. I should never try to do 2 of these in one day. It's really too bad. If I had but world enough and time, just think of how far ahead I could be getting. As it is, you're viewing this in early August, and it is almost mid-July when I am recording it. So, our lead time is shrinking somewhat. I expect it to shrink even more before this presentation, this massive multi-volume presentation about politics is through. If gasoline is $1.30 a gallon and milk is $2.60 a gallon, why did we kill 100,000 Iraqis to ensure the free flow of oil, but not 200,000 cheeseheads to ensure the free flow of milk? This was in the Progressive of February 1997, cited by Eric Cosberg. Nuclear war is a raging, insatiable beast whose instincts and appetites we pretend to understand, but cannot possibly control, says General Lee Butler. The Congressional Ethics Committee, one of the more creative oxymorons currently in use, guaranteed pension and the McDonald's nutritional chart are others of note, says Will Durst, who also refers to Newt Gingrich as the evil doughboy. Well, sir, as Sherry Little, a Maryland Mall marketing director, said, "We try to give our shoppers a pleasant experience, unhindered by civic responsibilities." Well, I like to give my shoppers an unpleasant experience, hindered by civic responsibilities. Well, as United Paramount Network President Lucy Salhaney says, comedy is comedy, and people want to laugh. Digressing a little from the Progressive, back to the Nation of February 10th, 1997. We cannot be free in America unless people are free in the third world. We must learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools, says Martin Luther King, who of course probably did not anticipate that Mexico, some 30 years after he spoke those words, would be embroiled in the worst depression of modern times. As Alexander Cockburn put it, "I've long since learned to expect little or nothing from an inaugural speech. It's like looking for good prose on an insurance form. So anfractious in its oleosity. Treacle-sodden apocalypse. We don't need civility, we need civilization. Bipartisanship is another fraud word, which reminds me of the anthropologist Laura Nader's brilliant phrase, coercive harmony. America is not a community. It is a nation encompassing faction, partisan interest, the powerful, the weak, the rich, the poor, with a future to be alloyed out of the crucible of fierce antagonism. There is no bridge to anywhere but prison for many in America. And prison is the community some 3 to 5 million people will inhabit here by the year 2010. Mandatory guidelines tie judges' hands. Pete Wilson pushes for majority verdicts in jury trials. The Fourth Amendment, protecting citizens against unreasonable searches and seizures, is virtually a dead letter. When imposing sentences, judges can take into consideration charges on which the jury has found the accused innocent. And there are every day fresh intrusions into electronic privacy. You might call it electronic piracy. See, pirates don't go away. They just get more sophisticated. I'll write that down. Let's put it this way. Old pirates never die. They just go upscale. Well, we're finally getting into February here. I'd like to quote a little definition from The Spectator of December 28th. I'm sorry, of January 25th. A cad behaves in an ungentlemanly way, but a bounder is beyond the bounds of society. according to Elia Lewis, who also says, quoting Plato, "There are three classes of men, lovers of wisdom, lovers of honor, and lovers of gain. It is in the last category that cads naturally fall. Cads love money, are hedonistic, and exude a joie de vivre, which makes them likely to have more friends than bounders do. They may be dishonorable and untrustworthy, but there is often something disturbingly likable about them. Cads are individualists, which is why they earn a grudging respect, even if their nonconformity has been at your expense. Equally, the cad's transgressions enable the outraged to tut together happily, because pushing against the boundaries by one helps define the rules for others. The cad will point out that this is the perfect example of the truism that rules are made for the obedience of fools and the guidance of wise men. A cad has, by definition, to be familiar with the minutiae of social mores so that he can break them. The true cad has a very high opinion of himself and despises those he deceives, justifying his deeds with a disdainful, they got what they deserved attitude. Arrogance is a prerequisite, self-doubt an unknown idea to the cad. Our country has produced millions of blameless greengrocers, but not one blameless monarch, says Shaw. Cads are rough on women, but some bounders end up in jail, says Di Lelewin. Bounders, unlike cads, have poor self-esteem. Their cruelty springs from weakness, and they justify it by attributing bad characteristics to those they harm. Well, according to Blanche, I don't tell truth, I tell what ought to be truth. In Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire. Well, here's some useless information for you. Spiders have no sense of smell. The ancient Egyptians thought the sun was a ball of dung. Euripides won third prize with his Medea. Each armadillo is an identical twin. The Athenian orator Demosthenes shaved half his head. The Disraeli once said an Arab was a Jew on a horse. Believing your teddy bear is alive will help you get girls. Rape has been noted in the British Rook. Nero ate leeks. Someone once named the book Cooking with God. Castrati don't go bald. Charles Lamb was a stutterer. False teeth were sometimes made of celluloid. Our brains are mostly water. Ferrets catch colds. Pope Adrian IV choked on a fly and died. The nose contains erectile tissue. Well, there are some pretty damning things that have been said about President Clinton. But of all the most damning things I have ever heard of that have been said against our chief executive, this one really goes top out of sight in anti-presidential invective. Have you ever seen a president so hungry for a notable place in history Bill Clinton can't stop talking about how history will regard him, as if he wants the affection of future generations as cravenly as he seeks the love of his own. Well, you might say the same about Nixon. Perhaps there was very little that was craven about the way he sought the love of his own generation. But, well, as Peter Gomes put it in The Advocate of February 4th, homosexuality is an act of nature, but there is an act of will in being a Republican. According to Terence McNally, the greatest gay character ever written is Hamlet. Gee, you want to think about that one for a while. See, there's a big flap of like Hamlet's commentary, which is kind of appropriate in a way. My sister is writing one of her papers, her major paper, on the melancholy Dane. So, I am becoming imbued with Hamlet's data because of this, since I am assisting her in any way short of actually doing her work for her, which I said to her that I would not do. Although given about 3 hours, I could probably whip together a pretty decent outline. Well, in any event, see, now I got to patch together my notebook. It's falling into pieces. These Meade college-bound notebooks, without the wireless ones, I mean, they're really nifty, but they tend to fall apart, which is unfortunate when you're as hard on your writing materials as I am. You must go through about 2 or 3 pens every week. If I didn't work at 3 libraries, it would be an unconscionable expense for me. But as it is, I manage somehow tearfully to get by. And sort of crudely patching together my notebook so that it doesn't totally fall apart. Of course, I may never have cause to look in it ever again. See, it's not so much that the back cover is falling apart, it's that the pages are coming out. Well, quoting from Campaigns and Elections, February 1997, you see we're getting closer to July. By the time October rolls around, we might even be in August. And by the time December rolls around, perhaps we'll have caught up entirely with the political world as I conceive it. As Ron Fashot, editor of Campaigns and Elections, says, soft money is the stink bomb of campaign finance. And after this major focus on campaign finance reform, yet another in a long series of bad ideas, that is, our campaign finance laws to begin with. Not that there shouldn't be laws, but that they should be perhaps devised in such a way as to cause the least amount of harm to free speech, and yet at the same time give the least advantage to unprincipled, unscrupulous people who have vast sums of money at their command, or unprincipled, unscrupulous politicians who are willing to forsake legislation in favor of fundraising, or in fact virtually forced to do so. By the very exigencies of our political system. Did you know that since 1976, Ohio, Louisiana, Delaware, Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania have always voted for the winners in presidential elections? Those are what you would call bellwether states. Some dictums of politics, as long as we're talking strategy. Avoid message fade. Before you go negative, build up your positives. If you don't, when your opponent hits you back, you'll likely crumble. That's what happened to Steve Forbes. Don't let your opponent run in the clear. An unanswered charge is believed. Spending millions doesn't guarantee success. Precinct walking, candidate meet and greets, and civic forum appearances. Those are what you need to excel at, as did Loretta Sanchez, who defeated Bob Dornan in California. On election night, Sanchez was behind by 233 votes. However, after a week of counting late absentees, Sanchez won by over 900 votes. It is a major error on your part to discuss strategies such as a benchmark poll designed to explore the feasibility of whether one should run or not with an unsigned would-be team member, such as a pollster or a consultant, especially if you shared sensitive information. Expect everything you said to be used against you. You could file for breach of contract against the pollster and request a restraining order forbidding them from working for any candidate in the race. But ultimately, you must run against your opponent, not his or her consultant. So what if people in politics concede that the pollster is a sleaze? It won't help if voters decide you're naive and foolish. Next time, do it right. Get a contract in writing with a penalty clause, and stop discussing sensitive information outside your inner circle, says Craig Varoga. Focus groups have their use, but they can be dangerous, particularly in political ad testing, if the results they produce are not put into a wider context of public opinion analysis. Again, Craig Varoga. Voters prefer candidates to be both serious and likable. Many portraits show candidates with a pleasant but subdued smile, i.e., lips closed or just upper teeth exposed. Avoid extremes. Goofy is okay for the Three Stooges, and grim is fine for Parisian intellectuals, but both are verboten for candidates. FDR could keep all the balls in the air without losing his own, said Henry Wallace. It is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong, said Voltaire. We're like radio politicians without having to run for office, says radio talk show host Jerry Williams. Feed him. He's a hungry dog. If you don't feed him lots of red meat, he'll eat you, says Monica Stewart on Investigating Representatives or Republicans. A great country worthy of the name does not have any friends, said Charles de Gaulle. Nations of great genius exhibit great patience, says William Gray III. The problem of politics is cooperation, said Woodrow Wilson. We cannot permit ourselves to be narrowed and dwarfed by slogans and phrases, said Coolidge, who of course came up with a slogan of his own when he said, "We cannot permit ourselves to be narrowed and dwarfed by slogans and phrases." And Jack Kent calls term limits the cry of losers. Well, this has been remarkably pleasant. Of course, the fact that I devoted about half an hour of this show to running old footage was perhaps one aspect of it which was very pleasing. But, you know, I kind of had a good time. And I'm not particularly as pressed for time as I thought I would be. In fact, I will probably finish this in just enough time to get ready for work. I already shaved. I sort of already put my lunch together. I suppose I could shout from the other room. No, I don't have to do that. I can throw everything in a bag and be out of here in a minute, if need be. My clothes are in the dryer. I gotta run over and get them. That'll take all of 6 minutes to get there and load them up and get back. And then, you know, I'll be able to hop into the shower, get all cleaned up. Loretta Sanchez. Just to talk a little bit about her. Although, of course, the big controversy now is the Landreau race in Louisiana, which they're still trying to make head or tail of. Those are the two big ones, though, the Sanchez-Dornan race in California and the Mary Landreau race in Louisiana. And there's not much that can be done about Loretta Sanchez at this point. Precinct walkers, according to the the National Review, were recruited through ads in a Latino newspaper and were paid to sign up new registrants. One group offered free raffle tickets, prize a Chevrolet Camaro, to all who could show proof of registering or voting. A push was made to get new registrants to vote absentee, and there was an organized effort to help absentee voters complete their ballots, according to Harold Johnson. At least 126 absentee ballots were dropped off at polling places by someone other than the voter or an immediate family member, as the law requires. Well, if that's true, it looks to me like we ought to whittle her lead back from 900 points to about 775. Oh, it was one of those seesaw races, so beloved of people who take pleasure in these types of things. So, according to Walter Benjamin, a relevance to the present is more important well, I don't know if I'm being very clear or displaying any of the traditional Aristotelian unities. In fact, I know I'm not in this presentation. Basically, this is just a grab bag of various jottings that I've managed to compile over the course of about a year. At least it will have been a year by the time I finish this. Michael Kelly in The New Republic of February 17th states, "A lack of curiosity, as any detective knows, is an interesting thing. When crimes are committed, the innocent people involved tend to be quite curious about what happened. The guilty party often forgets to feign an inquiring mind. After all, he knows what happened. Well, as Bill Clinton said, mistakes were made here by people who either did it deliberately or inadvertently." And let us read verbatim the entirety of his apologia to conclude. First of all, I didn't know about it. To the best of my recollection, I didn't know anything about his having that job until I read about it in the press. And I can't imagine who could have ever arranged to do something improper like that, and no one around here knew about it. It was just not, we did not know anything about it, and I can tell you categorically that that did not happen. I knew nothing about it. None of us did before it happened. And I didn't personally know anything about it till I read about it in the press. So I think when somebody makes a charge like that, there ought to be some burden on them to come forward with some evidence to substantiate their charge, instead of saying, we'll make a charge, see if you can disprove it. That's not the way things work, and that's a pretty irresponsible charge to make without having some evidence of it. And I'm just telling you, it's not so. So, anyway, Bill Clinton with a standard mistakes were made type statement. The passive exculpatory. Next week, to bring you part 13 of our presentation entitled Sins of the Grandfathers. This has been The Wrong Hero with Bad Ideas, part 12 of our lengthy ongoing series on politics. Thank you for tuning in. We're broadcast every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. We sure hope you enjoyed this presentation and liked looking at the tall ships as well. And we'll be seeing you in a week. And now I'd like to thank you very much. But it's time to go. Good night, good night, good night, good night. If I had the time, I'd read one more quote, but I know I don't. So we'll save it till next time. Modern dreams of liberation bred the modern nightmare of imprisonment. Two visions grew in tandem. The self set free from all bonds, Promethean, triumphant, and the self enchained in prisons that were somehow more humane, yet also more capacious and enduring than any before imagined. For every boundless ego there was an iron cage in waiting, the state, the family, the firm, even the isolated bonds of one's own isolated subjectivity. There, I said it, I meant it, quoting from Jackson Lear's. This will conclude our presentation.